Warning.
Warning!
Now for a word of caution.
Broadcasting straight from the All Hazards Prepper Command Center. Welcome to the All Hazards Prepper Show, where we discuss everything from natural disasters to human-made fiascos, technological failures, and those SHTF scenarios, with a hint of discussion on emergency management. Our mission: to keep you aware, prepared, and alive. We've got top-notch experts giving you the information you need to be ready for any hazard you may face. So you're not just prepper smart, but also survival ready. Now, buckle up for another thrilling episode and welcome the All Hazards Prepper himself, Blake.
Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show. This is your host, Blake. I hope everyone's staying aware, staying prepared, and staying alive out there. Today on the All Hazards Prepper Show, we have an exciting, very current event guest. Josh with the Counter Extremism Project is on. I planned this weeks before. We've really been discussing this and trying to schedule this for a month before everything has gone and happened in the last week with Israel and Iran. But today we have Josh on. Josh is a senior research analyst with the Counter Extremism Project, where he focuses on anti-Semitism, Iranian-sponsored terrorism, white supremacy, and ethno-nationalism. He has spent more than a decade working as an award-winning journalist covering the North American Jewish community, U.S.-Israel relations, the Arab-Israel conflict, and Iranian nuclear sanctions. He holds a master's degree in global affairs from NYU and bachelor's degree in journalism and Jewish studies from Penn State University. His writing has been appeared in Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, Huffington Post, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and The Hill, among other publications. Also, Josh, I was looking it up, and I didn't know that you have actually interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu, which I thought was very cool. Did you meet him in person, or was it virtual type interview?
Well, first, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. It's actually an interesting story. Excuse me. I interviewed Netanyahu back in 2008, I think it was 2008, 2009. I'd have to check the actual record on that. But it was in person, and I was working for the New Jersey Jewish Standard at the time, and a contact at an Israeli financial institution set up the interview. It was just me, Bibi, a Mossad agent, and our photographer sitting in a hotel lobby in New York. And actually, following up on that, I use this as a fun fact about me. I am probably one of the few people in most settings who can say that they have had lunch with Bibi and dinner with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Wow, that is definitely an interesting fact. Yes, very great, Josh. We found Josh. And the Counter Extremism Project, I have been searching probably over 3 months for a guest of Josh's nature to come on and discuss these types of topics. As you know, we're in season 3 where we're talking about counterterrorism. We're talking about active threats. This is something that preppers really don't talk about. We, talk about how to prepare, but here on the All Hazards Prepper Show, we like to dig into it. We like to break down these threats. We like to understand it. And I'm grateful for Josh to come on. Josh, first, just kind of kick us off. Tell us a little bit about the Counter Extremism Project, what you guys are for, and what you guys do on a daily basis to help make people aware and also help governments as well.
Sure. So the Counter Extremism Project launched in 2014 to be a central clearinghouse of information on global extremist movements. We look at violent extremist ideologies and how they are proliferating across the world. So when we launched in 2014, it was also at the height of ISIS's campaign in the Middle East. And so ISIS became a central focus for us, but we also extensively cover Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, white supremacy, far right extremism, far left extremism, and really have put together a large database covering all facets of violent extremism that covers various groups, it profiles leaders, supporters, foreign fighters, financiers. We look at where the support comes from for these organizations, whether that be financial or political support. And when appropriate, we look to cut off forms of support and really diminish the impact that some of these violent extremists can have, whether that means petitioning Google and YouTube specifically to remove content by Anwar al-Awlaki, the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula propagandist, which, and those videos, even though he has been dead for quite some time, his videos remained online up until just a few years ago and provided a major source of inspiration for foreign fighters going off to join ISIS and other foreign terrorist groups. So we look at those, how these extremist ideologies are proliferating, and try to shine a light on every aspect of that. And we do this to enlighten the public. All of our information goes onto our website, which can be accessed by the public, but we also focus on media and providing information to government officials so that we can raise awareness across the board of who these groups are, what they believe, and cut off all forms of support moving forward.
Explanation. That definitely is a group that is out there and definitely doing a lot of great work in today's challenging times as we are in with different global conflicts going on. And today we're just going to kind of break that down. To start this, we were kind of hoping to do a show on counterterrorism and the two talking one on current geopolitical threats. But after what occurred, in the last week and the Israel-Iranian conflict, we want to kind of talk a little bit broadly about that conflict. Have Josh really break that down, why this is occurring, the cultural and the religious reasons why these two foreign actors are constantly at it, and then really talking about how a lot of people, they look at the news and they say, why should I care about this? Why should I even pay attention to the news in general or this conflict in general? And today, me and Josh are going to kind of break that down. So Josh, getting us started, um, talk, give us your I guess broad input view from what has been occurring this last week. You have any thoughts as someone that researches and spends a lot of time in this channels, if you will. So if you just kind of want to give us your type of view
Mhm.
on what has occurred, and what, as an American, why should we care about this in general?
So, just starting with the big news over the past week, Israel launched a military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities on Friday, and then the United States joined the attack over the weekend. And various reports are saying that the nuclear program was either set back a couple of years, could be more extensive damage than that. We're still everyone's still trying to figure out exactly how much damage was done. But this is something that has been bubbling to the surface for many, many years, has been seeking to develop a nuclear program for well over a decade and going into over 2 decades. And we have seen a concerted effort by the United States and its allies to stymie that program through diplomacy, uh, and in order to prevent the threat of Iran developing a nuclear weapon. Now, some people will say, well, Israel has a nuclear weapons. Other nations have nuclear weapons. U.S. has nuclear weapons, and the U.S. is the only country that has dropped a nuclear bomb on another country in history. So why can't Iran also have nuclear weapons? And that goes to Iran's role as the primary state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And we see Iran's fingerprints in major terrorist attacks around the world going back to 1980s. These attacks have targeted Israelis, they've targeted Americans, they've targeted Europeans, and we cannot take Iran at its word when it says they have no interest in a nuclear weapons program, because its actions up until this point show that it is not a nation, is not a government that can be trusted. Iran's primary terrorist proxy is Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, which emerged in the 1980s with a massive attack on U.S. forces in Lebanon, the bombing of the Marine barracks and the embassy. Up until September 11th, Hezbollah was responsible for killing more Americans than any other terrorist group. That makes Iran responsible for killing more Americans than any other terrorist regime, because Iran is the driving force and enabler of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has also struck targets in Europe, in Bulgaria, bus bombing in, it was 2012, I believe, as well as the worst terror attack in Argentina's history, the AMIA Jewish Center bombing, 1994, which killed 85 people and wounded hundreds more, and it was the worst terror attack in Argentina's history. And an Argentinian court last year came to the conclusion that not only did Hezbollah carry it out, they did so at the direction of Iran. Coming back to the Middle East, not only has Hezbollah targeted Israel with thousands of missiles and rockets over the past 20 years, Iran has also provided missiles, finances, and technological know-how and training to Hamas, which carried out the worst attack on Jewish life since the Holocaust on October 7th, when it murdered 1,200 people in Israel. Iran has sponsored suicide bombings carried out by Iran as well as Palestinian Islamic Jihad that have murdered Israelis and Americans. Uh, there have been two legal cases in the United States of families of victims of suicide bombings in Israel that have targeted Iran. And according to those lawsuits, Iran was found culpable and responsible for those bombings. So, and then if we turn to Israel's east, to Yemen, which has been locked in civil war for about a decade now. Iran is a primary sponsor of the Houthi militias, and that militia has been creating havoc across Yemen, but also for the past almost 2 years now, it has launched a piracy campaign in the Red Sea, targeting shipping lanes, targeting U.S., Israeli, and other international shipping vessels, taking hostages, sinking vessels, and also launching missiles and rockets toward Israel itself. At the core of all of these is the Iranian regime, which is based on the ideology of Khomeiniism. Khomeiniism was developed by the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and it calls for a single Islamic a single Islamic jurist to oversee the political, military, and cultural aspects of Iranian society, which is the role of Iran's supreme leader, now currently Ali Khamenei. And you have Iranian military forces, primarily the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has sworn allegiance to the supreme leader and the Khomeiniist ideology. And this is an ideology that seeks to support the ideals of the revolution and export them beyond Iran's borders. So that has resulted in support and financially and militarily of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations. Iran has also been one of the worst domestic human rights abusers in the world, and the IRGC and its Basij force have arbitrarily arrested, tortured, and disappeared protesters. And this is a regime that cares more about its hardline ideology than it does about its own people. It wants to see the dominance of the Islamic revolution globally. It wants to see that dominance over the welfare of the Iranian people, who have been suffering under this regime for decades now. As Iran has expanded its global footprint, reaching into South America, Europe, as well as there have been Hezbollah sleeper agents who have been arrested in the United States. And we see that Iranian footprint expanding and seeking to disrupt Western civilization. Iran is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. You will hear government officials leading chants of death to Israel, but also death to America. And while the Iranian regime labels Israel the little Satan, the United States is labeled the big Satan. The United States is considered the primary enemy. Israel is an outpost of that. And so it is the local, regional outpost of the United States in the Middle East. That's why Iran is so bent on targeting Israel. But the larger goal has always been opposition to the United States. And for these reasons, the United States, Israel, and global allies have sought to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, which it could then pass off to one of its many terror proxies for use in any number of horrible situations. And that's about it in a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell, definitely is a good way to put that. It's definitely a very hard conflict to get. I get the question from my wife, from my family, from friends. I actually studied security studies and political science in college, so I have a little bit of background of this stuff, but not like you do. You know, people ask, why do we should we care? Why should the U.S. do anything against Iran? And then really, it's what you just said is that if they do get a nuclear weapon, they might not use it against Israel or America or European actors, but they may just give it to one of the proxy groups that
Mhm.
they work with, which we'll talk about here in a minute about proxy groups and what that really looks like. But that is a threat to America right there, let alone the other threats that are out there that they, are funding other terrorist groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Yemen, which definitely could affect Americans. So first, kind of talking about proxy groups. First, some people may not know what a proxy group is. If you could just tell people what proxy groups are, and you hit on that real, very great, but maybe explain, where these proxy groups are located, what they're really looking to do, either in the regions they are acting in, or if you kind of said earlier, there may be some here in the U.S. and we just don't really know about. Maybe break that down, sleeper cells and how sleeper cells work, and those types of things as well.
So, the Iranian proxy groups are independent, fully formed terror organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, but pardon me, my computer just started to shut down a little bit, share an either an ideological relationship with Iran, such as the case with Hezbollah and the Houthis, or they have other interests that align with Iran and receive other forms of support because of that. So let's break that down a little bit. So first we have groups like Hamas and groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, which are ideologically aligned with Iran. They share Iran's extreme Shiite philosophies. They are extreme, and again, I emphasize extreme. This is not to say that all Shiite Islam is extremist, but what we are looking at is a extremist and violent interpretation of that. And what we see is these groups are not only are they aligned with Iran uses that alignment to and provide these groups with finances, military training, weapons, and they form what Iran and these other groups have call the axis of resistance. So these are Iran linked groups in the region that are opposed to Israel, opposed to the United States, and support that Iranian ideology. Then you have groups like Hamas, which is primarily Sunni. So it does not align with Iran's it does align with Iran's anti-Israel positions. So this becomes useful for Iran, which has provided Hamas with financial and military support as well over the years. Hamas has its own regionalized goals. It wants to eliminate Israel. It wants to quote unquote liberate Palestine, which includes everything that is currently Israel. So there is no compromise to the 67 borders. Hamas wants the total destruction of Israel and replacing that with a state of Palestine. Its goals are largely limited to that. So we aren't going to see Hamas as actively threatening uh, or directly threatening the U.S. Or other nations because its primary focus is specifically Israel. Then you have Hezbollah, the Houthis, which also have their own regional agendas. Uh, Hezbollah was created to be an Iranian outpost. Also, to by its own admission, Hezbollah's reason for being is to liberate Lebanon from Israel. At the time in the 80s, Israel was occupying southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah set itself up as a guerrilla force to push Israel out. However, since Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000, despite that withdrawal, Hezbollah has continued to launch rockets and other attacks against Israel across the border. It was active in the Syrian civil war next door. It was activated to support Iranian ally Bashar al-Assad against anti regime forces during the civil war, and it really has dragged Lebanon through hell. In addition, Hezbollah serves within the Lebanese government. It acts as a political party in Lebanon and has enough support on the ground as well as through other political allies in Lebanon that it can really block the government from acting. And we have seen this before. Recently, Lebanon was, the government was frozen for several years. And after the expiration of the term of its previous president, Lebanon went 2 years before a new president could be appointed by the parliament because of Hezbollah and its political allies pushing for a pro Iranian candidate, whereas other parties in Lebanon wanted to put in a candidate who was not as friendly to Iran because you have other parties that recognize the damage Iran has done to Lebanon over the years. Moving aside from that, over to the Houthis, which includes in its uh, ideology, literally, the Houthi banner says to the Jews, but also the Houthis have been waging the civil war in Yemen for 10 years, which has resulted in two governments as well as a completely fractured nation. And over the past 2 years, since the October 7th Hamas attack, Yemen has, or the Houthis have played a larger role in launching attacks against Israel. So we have these very different groups, and there are other groups as well operating within Gaza, as well as Hamas is Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and there are militias in Iraq that are backed by Iran. It provides, again, financial and military support to these Shiite militias, which are equally as devoted to the Khomeiniist ideology. So you have all these different groups in various parts of the region that are waging domestically their own wars and their own conflicts, and they have their own agendas. But the larger picture is that most of them are also so subservient to Iran that they can be activated to present a threat to the United States, to Europe, yeah, of course, to Israel, and really to the world. And so the danger of a nuclear Iran becomes not that Iran will attach a nuclear bomb to a missile and fire it at Israel, because Israel does maintain that second strike capability, but that Iran will pass along a dirty bomb to one of its terror proxies that will then carry out a bombing possibly similar to what we saw in Argentina 94, or in Bulgaria with the bus bombing, or perhaps Hezbollah launching it from using some of its own technology. So that is the basic threat, that of a nuclear Iran, and why we saw the United States and Israel take action this weekend after Israeli and U.S. intelligence concluded that Iran was no longer years away from obtaining a nuclear bomb, was rather much closer than expected. Israel, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, it had no other option left at this point but to preemptively strike, as it did in Iraq in 1981 and previously did in Syria prior to the civil war.
Perfect. Yes, that's definitely great information, and really breaking down there of these different groups and the influence they have, not only in the regions that they act in, but also the within America and other parts of Europe, and all around the world. When we see terror threats, they most likely came from one of these organizations or another. I guess Al Qaeda is not necessarily sponsored by Iran. Who Al Qaeda is just kind of operate, and ISIS, I suppose, operate as their own kind of entities in their own countries. Is that's right?
Right. So Al Qaeda emerged um, several decades ago, or a few decades ago, and its own organization. It grew out of the Afghani Mujahideen in the 1980s, and uh, ISIS then grew out of Al Qaeda following the Iraq War in the early 2000s, but while they have very similar goals, the methods they use to go about them are very different. What we saw with ISIS was the group swept across Iraq, Syria, and the region and sought to create an Islamic caliphate. And we saw that caliphate for a few years in action. Al Qaeda also wants to see a global Islamic caliphate. However, Osama bin Laden and other Al Qaeda founders came to reach the conclusion early on that while a caliphate is the goal, it could not establish one as long as the United States remained as its primary enemy, because any caliphate that Al Qaeda established would be opposed by the United States. And as we saw with ISIS's caliphate was eventually deposed. But when ISIS grew out of Al Qaeda in Iraq, whereas Al Qaeda has the caliphate as its secondary goal to toppling the United States. ISIS sees the caliphate as its primary goal first, and from there it will expand. And we saw ISIS building up its caliphate in Iraq and Syria. We saw foreign fighters flocking, and also non fighters flocking to this caliphate from around the world, including the United States and Europe. And they sought to build this caliphate. We saw people who went there to be doctors, they went there to be housewives, they went there to be shopkeepers or just to live there. And we also saw quite a number of people who traveled there to take up arms and join that fight. But that is that caliphate came crashing down um, in 2018. But ISIS also launched several. Sorry, I'm blanking on the word now. It launched several subgroups throughout the region. So what we see ISIS in Afghanistan, we see ISIS in Egypt, and these groups act independently, but with the overarching goal of ISIS's mission. So they are seeking to overthrow their local regions to eventually become part of the larger caliphate once that ISIS reestablishes that. So the goal of everyone else is to prevent that, and we see quite a number of counterterrorism operations continuing across the region to prevent ISIS from gaining the same power and presenting the same type of threat that it did in 2014.
That's definitely a great explanation and kind of talks a little bit about there about counterterrorism and the global other actors that are out there, the bad actors that are out there within, that are seeking, a caliphate, seeking, West, they do not like Western civilization, they do not like Western thoughts, ideas, religion. They obviously do not like Christianity or Jewish population. So definitely great explanation. That can you talk just briefly too about the Taliban? We talk about that. You hear about it a lot, especially with the pullout within Afghanistan during the Biden administration. Can you briefly describe that and how that is maybe tying in and affecting the current conflicts that are going on right now?
Sure. So the Taliban, which translates to literally is Pashto for students, is an extremist group that emerged several years ago and was in control of Afghanistan in the 90s and harbored Al Qaeda through the 90s, allowing uh, Osama bin Laden and others to plan the 9/11 attacks. Following September 11th, the United States and its allies deposed the Taliban and built a new government in Afghanistan, which stood until 2021, August 15th, when, following the United States pullout from Afghanistan, the Taliban forces overthrew the government and have been in control of Afghanistan ever since. Now, following the 2001 war and when the Taliban was deposed, the Taliban transformed itself into an insurgency group, launching attacks on Afghan and U.S. forces across the country, and continued doing that until 2021 when the U.S. finally withdrew its forces, um, and then the Taliban uh, just overran the remaining Afghan forces. And currently, the Taliban remains in control, imposing its own extremist uh, governance over Afghanistan. We see a horrible uh, uh, we see horrible human rights abuses taking place under this government, flogging, is a regularly practiced punishment. Um, women's education has been severely curtailed, um, and we see a hardline version of Islam being imposed across the country. And this is Afghanistan has become a regional pariah. It has allowed Al Qaeda again to take root in within its borders. Uh, Afghanistan has, under the Taliban, has fought against ISIS, so that's one good thing we can say about it. Probably the only good thing we can say about the Taliban regime. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Just because the Taliban remains opposed to ISIS does not mean that it is going to be friendly to the US or others. So, because again, we see Al Qaeda taking root again in Afghanistan, and really, this country is being used by the Taliban as well as these other groups as a base for terrorism. And this is not good for the Afghani people. It's not good for Afghanistan's neighbors. And in the end, it is not good for the world. Now, adage the old adage is that Afghanistan is where empires go to die. We saw the Russians in the 80s uh, fighting in Afghanistan. It was disastrous in the end. The U.S. did not do after the U.S. withdrawal. Um, Afghanistan has once again become this haven for terrorism.
A great overview of the Taliban and why, I guess you could say, we try not to get political here, but why the failed pullout was so significant and what that's going to look like here in the future with harboring groups like Al Qaeda. But it is good to know at least we're fighting ISIS, because ISIS is definitely that next extreme level. Of course, like you've talked about, definitely all the groups are bad, but ISIS is, a little bit worse. So, Josh, this has been excellent. Everyone, we are going to have a part 2 of this episode of the show. I like to keep it underneath 45 minutes an hour. On the next show that we have Josh on, we're going to be talking a little bit about counterterrorism, talking a little bit about, more of how it will affect you as a U.S. citizen, and also looking forward to the future on Josh's view of where we go from here with the Israel-Iran conflict. Do we see, Iran getting nuclear weapons again? And if so, what's that next level of retaliation from the U.S. and Israel and other global partners that could stop this? So, hope everyone enjoyed this episode. It's definitely in depth. I found it very enlightening and great. Josh, thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to part 2 of this episode. And everyone continue to stay prepared, or stay aware, stay prepared, and stay alive out there. The All Hazards Prepper out.
Thank you for tuning in to the All Hazards Prepper Show. The All Hazards Prepper platform is part of the All Hazards Emergency Management Group, LLC, committed to assisting individuals, families, small businesses, and event or entertainment venues in prepping for various hazards. Be sure to follow the All Hazards Prepper on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. Always remember to stay aware, stay prepared, and stay alive.